Hey there. So today, while doing a few keyword searches online, I ran across this interesting article. Now, I don't like the particular framing of certain words they use, like diversity, for example. When they're talking about diversity, they talk about it as a watchword in comics, and they say that it's a known fact that the market has been shifting from white males to everybody in the last 20 years. So when they talk about diversity, that's the lens they look at. It's kind of insulting when you think about the idea there too. Like females have never been part of the audience, like people of color have never been there, like we don't have international sales, like you had some kind of gatekeeping method, and that people, if you were outside of this specific demographic, for some reason when you picked up the comic book, I guess it would burn your hands, quite like holy water. I'm not sure exactly how that was supposed to work, but apparently something kept people away. Now within this, we have an interesting secondary point, however, and it's basically the you got what you want, why don't you support comics? Now, there's an easy answer to that. It's these people have never been interested in comics anyway, but when you're looking at it, I still like the framing of the article. So let's look at this. Comics, you got your diversity, so why don't you buy them? Posted on April 18th, 2016 by Adam Frey. Diversity has been the watchword in comics for quite some time now. It's a known fact that the market has been shifting from quote-unquote white males to quote-unquote everybody over the last 20 years, and unsurprisingly, audiences have been demanding characters and concepts that look more like 21st century America and less like a Norman Rockwell painting. Within that, they act like there is no diversity within comics, like we've never had that before. It's very interesting that these people, they try to pat themselves on the back for what they brought to comics. They say, look at us, look what we brought. In the last 20 years, we actually introduced this notion that wasn't here before. Before 1998, because actually 1996 rather, we had no diversity there. All the other characters that you saw before that, they apparently were all white, even though they didn't look like it. Imagine that. So anyway, let's continue. This has been a loud outcry, and a search on various comic blogs and websites will turn up any number of articles calling for more diversity in what's published. In fairness, those three links are to this website, but you've seen diversity calls elsewhere. I always hate this practice, by the way. Man, look out there. Look how many people are calling for this. By the way, watch ourselves as we internally link everything, because we want to clickbait you there. You need to see when we did it, but hey, if you do web searches, you'll find that too. It's a very duplicitous tactic these people set down, but yes, there are a lot of articles that are framed like this. They also represent themselves in such a way that, again, when they talk about diversity, if you were to change certain keywords within that, basically you need a formulary to excuse your behavior. I guess the best way to put it. Power, prejudice, Pringles, popsicles and all that, that's actually what equals prejudice. That's what equals the problem. If you need to excuse your behavior with something like that too, I've said this time and again, but when you need to have that to excuse what you say, then you're probably an awful human being, no matter what they taught you in your gender studies classes. But anyhow, continuing. Well, guess what, Comicdom? You got your diversity. We're about to do some number crunching here, but a survey of the comics released last month shows an incredible demographic shift in lead characters. It's by no means perfect, but Diamond's top 200 titles shows a plethora of non-white male leads. Here's a breakdown of titles by rank, sales numbers, and demographics of the lead characters. So you can see the way that they break these down. We'll actually hit a few of them. The rank, number 15. We're talking about Black Widow, and that's a number 1 here. They sold 62,000 copies, but you're looking at a number 1. We look at Spider-Man number 2. Of course, that is a flagship title here, so you sell 60,000. We have Captain America Sam Wilson, number 7, 54,000 title. That's not terrible when you look at that. You have a black male there as well, they're saying. Mighty Thor, 54,000. White female. When this number drifts down to, it gets worse and worse. But even looking like Mockingbird, Number 1, Marvel, white female, 42,000. And you continue on down the row here. You can see how abysmal some of these sales are. Now, these people, they've been calling for this stuff time and again, saying they would back this, but the reality behind it, of course, is that they don't support anything. They're actually not in this fandom most of the time to begin with. I'm not saying all of these people either, because that would be absurd. You definitely have some of these people. They're here. They're mainstays. Some of them are actually professionals. The problem is, by and far, they're talking about this shifting demographic. What they're saying is, we want more people that are like this, and the people that were out there still buying comics, we don't want you at the table. We don't want your money. And years upon years of that have driven a lot of people away. And it doesn't matter if they're white or if they're male. A lot of people just won't abide that. That's why you have so much animosity now, because you've heard this stuff time and again. And by now, this was a 2016 article, by now we've had that amped up. You know, we recently had people talking about politics as well. I saw Perez just today. I saw a message from her that said that, you know, if you're a centrist now, you're actually a conservative. So, you know, pushing and pushing. They've got to push this bar and push this envelope a little bit more. They got to block list a few more people, because that's what current year calls for. That's inclusion. You know, pushing out the people that you want to exclude, that's actually inclusion, because more people look just like you and sound just like you. You've created your perfect market, except it's not sustainable because none of you actually buy comics. But anyhow, continuing. So, doing a lot better, right? Out of the top 200 comics, that's 38 titles where the lead is not a white heterosexual male. It's not perfect, but it's a much more diverse spread of characters than we had 5 years ago. Now, I'm bothered by that idea there. They basically sit down and they say that 38 out of 200, that's not enough. That's not a bad place, but, so they throw this caveat. There is no magic number for these people, except, again, I throw this out time and again too, but when I saw Black Panther being talked about by BuzzFeed, it was called hella diverse. It hit that level they were happy about, because you were talking about 91% non-white, non-male. Actually, non-white was the kicker there more than anything, but also non-white male. Now, within this, you also have worth noting here, this list excludes books like Justice League or We Are Robin, which include a mixed cast, because of course you can't have the mixed cast there. That blows something out of the water. You know, when you're talking about teams and you're talking about representation, not to mention the fact that we're talking about aliens here, we talk about all kinds of different things. I mean, some books, they might have a representation, like say a Green Lantern, where you may run into, you know, how many species out there. They could look like anything, but hey, they are what they are. I wonder in that too, how does Sinestro come about? Does he count as a white male? I figure they count him as one, but you know, in that is not a white male. But anyhow, let's continue. Certainly, this is not demographic perfection. White female seems to be the dominant category. There's still a long ways to go in getting more Asian and Hispanic lead books on the market, and religion is seldom seriously represented in comics. I wonder if they would take that notion and they would run with that with Christianity. Of course, you know that's not what they mean when they're talking about religion. They want something outside of what they consider the patriarchal norm or the hierarchical norm, and when you get into that, they don't mean Christianity. They mean religion, like something else outside of that. You could have nothing there, and that's not good enough for them, because that's not a baseline. You have to have something else represented. It's kind of an absurd idea, but that's the way that comes across. Still continuing. But like I said, said, this is a lot better than 5 years ago, except for one thing. It's the sales. A substantial quantity of diverse titles means nothing if they're plummeting towards cancellation, and many of these books are headed in that direction. Comic books are a remarkably competitive marketplace, and Marvel and DC are businesses first and social justice pioneers second. They shouldn't be in the social justice pioneer anything. When you're looking at this, if there are characters that are good, they're written well, people look past any kind of superficial notion out there. When I look, for example, at the Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps, when I'm looking at those individuals, I don't see color. I don't see gender. I see a team that actually does something and they rise above situations. When you look at that, look exactly at who is on the helm there. That thing is representative AF, if you want to throw that out, but still, we never hear about that. That is just not enough. There's not enough representation there, and even if there is, the wrong people write it or the wrong people color it, so you always have to go further down the rabbit hole. Continuing, if a title isn't selling past a certain point, it will inevitably go and be replaced with the next hot property. If you don't believe me, you need to look at the rankings and sale numbers of the books above and compare them to how they did when they initially launched. For example, Silk got a huge push last year as Marvel's first book with an Asian female lead, which was not correct, but never mind. Yeah, we don't actually let facts get in the way of that. It's much like the Black Panther push. It doesn't really matter how that's set up. There's always a caveat to push a little fiction, am I right? But continuing anyhow, Silk Volume 1, number 1 in 2015 was Diamond's number 9 book with 74,501 units sold. Now a year later, Silk Volume 2 is dropped to 79th place with only a third of those numbers. A-Force got a big boost in the press on launch as an all-female superhero book led by a female writer. A-Force Volume 1, number 1, was the 6th highest selling book with 114,528 copies sold. Last month it was ranked 53 with 34,133 sold. That's barely a quarter of its original number. Now when looking at that, why do you think that is? Why do you think, as the writer of this, why do you think that these titles underperform? Do you think that it's because people don't like diversity, or do you think it's because people are not down with terrible titles? A lot of times you have individuals being sold an item that as a number 1, they're going to buy it. They're going to check it out. Maybe not now. We've had so much event fatigue and we've had that restart fatigue that those numbers have diminished, but by and large, collectors like their number 1s. They like to check out something new. People that are reading like to do that too. Even though they become more and more skeptical as time goes on, they still want to check something out because they want to believe that that company, they're going to get it right. Fandom is very forgiving. Now, if that continues to be good, you're going to see diminished returns over time, but still, people will stay with it. Look at a Batman White Knight, for example. There was all the hype behind it. People enjoyed it, but those numbers, they're still continuing. We're getting more and more out of that. We've seen third presses now, fourth presses in some instances. Look at Mr. Miracle. That was all word of mouth, and it was solid. Also, if anyone wants to discount any of these titles as being white male, you need only look at other characters within that. You look at the Neo Joker, for example, the role of Harley Quinn. You have certain people of color out there within White Knight, and then when you look at the other, you have the same thing. You have a very strong lead female character. So within that, you see a problem about the push anyhow. The other titles that they mentioned, they were pushed straight on identity. These other things, they grew off word of mouth, and they were pushed on presence of storyline alone. You didn't have a name like Mr. Miracle that was causing people to go out there and buy it. Batman White Knight, it did actually benefit from the name Batman, but presence of story and professionalism has helped push those titles. But anyhow, let's continue. And those are just books that are lucky enough to get a big push in the press. Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur is the only book with a black female lead right now, and while it's gotten some fan favorite attention, it mostly seems to have missed the spotlight. Unsurprisingly, it didn't do great on launch, with the first issue ranked at 63 and only 38,133 copies sold. Today it's slated for cancellation, with its latest issue falling to number 130 and under 15,000 sold. Edit. Actually, I'm mistaken. I haven't yet seen a cancellation from Moon Girl yet, so if it's still going, then good. I hope the numbers pick up, though. Now, looking at that, you look at the things that are behind that comic book. That comic book, the character could be great. You could have something that actually bonds with so many different age groups. You could have something that really, it ascends beyond what they're talking about. They're talking about it being an African, actually they use the word black, so black female lead here. They're talking about it solely on that. We have a black female lead. We have somebody that meets an age demographic. They have something cool behind them. All of the assets that should work for a story, and yet when you look at it, it's a terrible product. Why was that? Well, because it approached things from a certain way, and it failed that way because it wasn't a good story. That's the thing with comics. They need to at least be entertaining. They need to be good. Continuing, Red Wolf did much worse, dropping from 64 to 175 on charts in only 4 months. I never read that personally. Of course, some drop-off is understandable. It's impossible for a book to sustain its first issue numbers because a launch issue is always ordered in excess for speculators and people looking to try a new book. Speculators inevitably don't come back for later issues, and some people try a book and just don't like it. These charts also don't account for digital sales, which the big publishers have been notoriously coy about releasing. We simply don't know if, for example, all new Wolverine's readers have jumped from the print to the digital version, although that book has also lost upwards of 60,000 print readers since its launch. The fan favorite Squirrel Girl is apparently doing well in the digital and trade markets, so it's presumably a safe book despite its anemic 20,000 plus sales. Personally, with Squirrel Girl, I think that there is something else at play there. I honestly think it's being pushed as a certain purpose, and it makes enough money that it offsets itself. Still, when you look at it, calling it a fan favorite, that's really reaching out. If you want to call it a fan favorite, then why does it only sell 20,000 books? If you're saying that it only reaches this many people, then it's really pigeonholed there, and it's failing on some level. Why do you consider that a fan favorite? Personally, I think you give it excuses that you wouldn't give other books, and that's what I see time and again with a lot of these titles. They're given caveats that other things would never be given because they're represented a certain way. Basically, you're getting played by marketing, and you're not smart enough to see that transpiring. It's an ugly, ugly thing that's happening behind the scenes too, and you're buying into that, which, kudos on the company selling a terrible title that way, but bad form when people pick it up because inevitably it's going to have to heighten more and more and more until you have some kind of qualifier stack that's beyond absurd to sell a title. Now, continuing here, on the other hand, we can guess that black-led Moon Girl, edited see above, or lesbian-led Angela, Queen of Hell aren't doing so well since they're both slated for cancellation. Yeah, and look at those too. Angela, Queen of Hell literally evoked feminism within fights. It literally talked about Israel. I mean, it tried to be coy about this stuff, but when you look at it, that woke take, it just drives people away. People that would have been on board, they said, heck no, I'm not down with this. I would be one of those people too. Continuing. Over at Marvel, it's probably fair to speculate that Silk, Spider-Woman, Scarlet Witch, and Patsy Walker, aka Hellcat, are probably headed for the chopping block. Silk and Spider-Woman are at least safe through their 14th and 12th issues, respectively, as their trade paperbacks for those issues have already been solicited, and they're both involved in the Spider-Women crossover, which will boost their sales. But it's not looking good for them, with both having lost a lot of sales since their launch. It's harder to predict DC's future since certain titles will probably always be published even with weak numbers: Wonder Woman, Catwoman, Harley Quinn. With others, it's already a given that their current iterations are doomed: Midnighter, Black Canary, Starfighter. That leaves the question of whether books like Constantine and Bombshells will hang in there with dropping numbers, but history suggests that they won't. Now, it's interesting to see that dismissive attitude there too. Well, some of these, they'll always be printed. Don't they count, when you get into those? But again, we have to have a specific number. It doesn't matter how well certain things do. We always have to have more, because if we sat down and we said, yep, that's a good number, well, then these people would have nothing else to complain about. And also, they don't support comics, so when things get shut down, they have even more to talk about. They have even more to complain about, because that failed title, it doesn't really matter. You still have to have a replacement title, or you're an ist or a phobe or what have you. Anyhow, continuing. At the end of the day, what is selling isn't surprising. It's the hot titles, popular characters, licensed properties, and crossovers. March 2016 top sellers were Batman, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and Star Wars, and other titles in the top 20 or so books tended to follow that trend. If Harley Quinn sells well, it's probably less because she's a female character and more because she's just massively popular at the moment, succeeding in spite of her popularity and not because of it. And we've got a whole summer of Civil War II and DC Comics Rebirth ahead of us, and that's focused on sales and not on diversifying the audience. Now, that's a very messed up way of putting things. Harley Quinn, she's succeeding not because she's a female, but because she's connecting with an audience. That's exactly what characters should do. They should go above that. But the way this person is setting that up, that somehow makes them non-diverse, because they're not being pimped as diverse. Therefore, that's not good enough. It's a crazy, crazy idea when you get down to that. Continuing, yes, the publishers have a responsibility to promote their diverse titles. Marvel seems to have learned their lesson on that front. The Marvel Now era had 3 woman-focused titles that all failed: Red She-Hulk, Journey into Mystery with Sif, and Fearless Defenders, but 2 of those titles just took over existing books and didn't get much of a push. But today, Marvel's giving their female-led books a heck of a push, even doing a True Believers month in September 2015 with 10 $1 reprints of female books, which all sold pretty well for reprint titles. But even that doesn't seem to have been enough. In other words, part of the blame for the failure of diversity-led titles has to lie with you, the readers. No one is obligated to buy a book, and they're not interested in just because it hits a diversity check mark. Now, you've talked about those this whole time with this, saying diversity, diversity, and diversity, but now you're saying, hey, people aren't obligated to buy these titles just because they hit that diversity quota. It's kind of a messed up way of framing that, don't you think? If you push and push and push for something because it only meets X, then shouldn't you give money to everything meeting X? I mean, isn't that a logical step that way? Continuing, and yes, Marvel and DC have to make these titles interesting enough to bring in readers. Now, that is something I've said this whole time. Titles fail on their merits. Now, sometimes titles simply fail. Over time, all titles, they're reset to zero unless they're monoliths. Still, you have titles that are not good out there. We have to pretend that they're not selling because of diversity or because people hate the writer because they identify a certain way, when the title can just be hot garbage. I mean, people don't want to admit that, however, because just like we see characters written where they don't have flaws because people are afraid to talk about that, well, they're also afraid to talk about the flaws within the individuals that are producing that. They want to pretend that they're all perfect, they're all like this supreme talent, and there's nothing that needs to be worked on. Within that, of course, we'll see more failure. But of course, we are going to pretend anyway. We're going to keep with that because that is the state of current year. Continuing. Still, it's baffling that we have a comics community that regularly demands diversity and yet doesn't support the books which have risen to meet that demand. If this keeps up, then the books will be canceled, and when they return, they'll revert back to their non-minority-led counterparts. With that, it is not, again, the minority or non-minority that they're throwing out there. We're talking about titles. When they're changed up for no reason, like when we're looking at Lady Thor falling, why did that fail? We could have had a good title within that. We could have actually had something solid. But instead, look at the push for identity politics. Look at the way it approaches. We actually had a bad guy give up because, they were woke enough to realize they didn't want to fight a woman because feminism. Now, within a comic book like that, when I'm seeing that, I don't find that uplifting. I find that to be not only disingenuous, I find that to be a reason to put the comic down because that is somebody taking to the pulpit and preaching at me. I don't like that. I'm sure most people don't either. Continuing, this may be the lesson that DC took going into this summer's Rebirth launch. A year ago, DC pushed the DCU label, which was intended to reflect a more diverse marketplace. We got Starfire, Midnighter, and Prez out of it, and we can see how that worked out. A year later, we're getting Rebirth, which for all intents and purposes looks to be a return to the DC of old. It's a return to what's safe, not what's diverse. Now, when I look at certain titles, we have another launch of characters that are out there. These characters, we have so many different things that are really represented under this new launch umbrella. We also have so many other titles. Still, we have titles that rely on good story, good people, good promotion, and we have other things that impact, like bad actors. Those things that we're supposed to pretend don't actually impact comics. Got news for you, they actually impact comics. I wish I had a seat at the table to talk to some of the people in charge, because I would love to frame this and tell them in the correct way how this is worded. The people whispering in their ears, the ones with the poisonous pens, those people are not framing things correctly. They should be talking to us, the readership, the individuals that have been here time and again and that spend loads of money, because we're the people they end up losing over time. And once we're gone, once we break that habit, we do not come back. That's the saddest part of that. With comics, there's a love, and when you change that love to something else, then you can't be expected to return just because they wise up. Take Marvel, for example, in this new fresh start. They're wising up to the fact that, hey, some of these things that they did, they were bad. The only problem within that is they haven't really changed up anything. They still have bad actors there. They still have all of this animosity that they've built up. They've pretended it doesn't even exist. They haven't gone out and addressed anything that people have spent all of this time trying to get them to do anything about. So fresh start, it'll probably fall on its face because it's another cash grab, or at least it looks like it. But I guess we'll see. Anyhow, continuing. If the market really wants diversity, it needs to start putting its money where its mouth is. Put down Civil War II and pick up Silk. Ugh. Put down Harley Quinn and try Mockingbird. Blah. These books don't have to fail if readers actually support them and send the the publishers a clear message that it's what they want to read. The publishers are giving you an opportunity to prove this, that this is what you want. The problem with all of this, of course, is that you're talking about people that, besides not supporting something because they're not interested in it, a lot of them espouse socialism. They don't have money to support things even if they wanted to. It's not an offensive thing that meant to anybody that can't afford anything at the time, but when you're dealing with people that don't want to support industry, that see that as the enemy, then why in the heck would they do that? They're just trying to change something for the sake of changing it, because it's something that they can go and rally around, because hashtag activism in this new day and age, it's lazy activism. It allows people to attack something without actually doing anything, and it's a lot easier, to picket something with a little hashtag on Twitter than to actually go out and try to do work and actually change up something, or to spend money in to actually promote something that you really enjoy. But continuing and ending this, your diverse books are waiting, and more can come if it's what you really want. You, the readers, need to show the companies that the call for diversity is real and not just a vocal minority. That's the thing. Everybody here, you guys are a definite, shrill vocal minority. You do not represent comic fans. That's the thing that you need to get. Or moreover, I shouldn't use the word fans. You don't represent customers there, because customers already are diverse. We already see diversity there. We have individuals represented from all over. We see people, internationally. We see people from all different races, creeds, identities, and so on. We see them here at the table already. Those are the people that have been talking to you and saying, hey, let's focus on good stories. Hey, let's actually produce things that are good quality, and let's not backslide while listening to these people saying we have to have something that exists within a formulary. All right, anyway, that took a little while to go through, but I still think it's worth it. I think it's worth looking at all this. Thank you.